The school hallway was quiet, almost eerily so. The final bell had already rung, and most of the students had either rushed out to the buses or gathered in small clusters, chatting about weekend plans. But inside the dimly lit school bathroom, a girl stood frozen, her breath shaky, her heart pounding in her chest. Emma tightened her grip on the edge of the sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her hands trembled, her face pale, her wide, fearful eyes darting toward the bathroom door. She had to get out. Now. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, slow and deliberate. A shiver ran down her spine. She knew who those footsteps belonged to. The same person who had made her stomach twist with dread. The same person she had tried so hard to avoid. But today had been different. Today, she had seen something she wasn't supposed to. A single tear slipped down her cheek as she backed away from the mirror, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had to move. She had to run. With one deep breath, Emma bolted toward the door, her sneakers skidding slightly against the tiled floor. As she pushed it open and sprinted into the hallway, she didn't stop. She didn't even look back. All she could think about was getting away, getting to someone who could help. And then she saw him. At the end of the hallway, near the janitor's closet, Mr. Lawson was locking up for the day. The school's janitor, an older man with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor, had always been there in the background, sweeping floors, fixing lockers, replacing light bulbs. Most students barely noticed him, but right now, he was the only person Emma could trust. "Mr. Lawson," she gasped, her voice raw with desperation as she ran straight to him. "Please, you have to help me." The janitor turned, startled by the urgency in her voice. His brow furrowed as he took in her pale face, the fear in her eyes. "Emma, what's wrong?" Before she could answer, another set of footsteps sounded behind her, heavier, more purposeful. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Mr. Lawson followed her gaze, his expression darkening as he saw the figure approaching. His grip tightened on the mop handle in his hand. Something was very, very wrong, and he wasn't about to stand by and let it happen. Mr. Lawson's grip on the mop handle tightened as he shifted his stance, instinctively stepping between Emma and the approaching figure. His weathered face remained calm, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. The way Emma trembled, the way her breath came in quick, uneven gasps, the way she clutched the edge of his sleeve as if holding on to the last thread of safety she had left. "Emma," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "Take a deep breath. Tell me what's going on." Emma's lips parted, but before she could speak, the figure behind her finally stepped into the dim hallway light. It was Principal Matthews. Mr. Lawson's expression didn't change, but Emma felt his body tense. Beside her, the principal wasn't an imposing man, not at first glance. He was in his late 40s, always dressed neatly in a suit and tie. His salt and pepper hair slicked back in a way that made him look polished, almost rehearsed. To most, he was just another strict administrator, the type who rarely smiled and had an air of authority that kept students on edge. But to Emma, at this moment, he was something far worse. His eyes locked onto hers, and though his face held a carefully controlled expression, there was something in his gaze that sent another wave of fear crashing over her. "There you are, Emma," Principal Matthews said, his voice smooth, too smooth. "I was just looking for you." Emma's fingers tightened around Mr. Lawson's sleeve. The janitor didn't move, didn't even blink. His years working in this school had taught him one thing. When a student was this scared, there was always a reason. "I think she's fine right here," Mr. Lawson said, his tone neutral but firm. Principal Matthews let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head as if amused by the whole situation. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. "Emma and I were just having a conversation earlier. She got a little upset, but I wanted to make sure everything was cleared up before she went home." Emma's stomach twisted. That wasn't true. That wasn't even close to true. She felt a lump rising in her throat. But before she could speak, Mr. Lawson turned slightly, just enough to look her in the eye. "Emma," he said, his voice softer now, "you don't have to say anything you don't want to." Her vision blurred with tears. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them, the way he gave her the choice. No one had done that before. Principal Matthews's smile faltered just slightly, a flicker of something cold passing through his eyes. "I'd appreciate it if you'd let me handle this, Mr. Lawson. This is a school matter." The janitor let out a slow breath through his nose, tapping his fingers against the mop handle. "Funny thing," he mused, tilting his head. "I've been working here a long time, seen a lot of school matters, but I've never seen a student this scared of a principal before." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Emma felt her whole body tense as Principal Matthews shifted slightly, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. It wasn't a move meant to intimidate, at least not in a way that anyone else would notice. But she did. She noticed everything now. Mr. Lawson noticed too. "Emma," he said again, calm but insistent. "Do you want to go home?" She nodded, barely able to breathe. "Then go," he said simply. "I'll walk you out." Principal Matthews took a step forward, his polished demeanor cracking just slightly. "I really don't think—" Mr. Lawson didn't let him finish. He turned his back to the principal and started walking with Emma toward the nearest exit, his pace steady but unwavering. Emma could hardly believe it. No one ever ignored Principal Matthews. No one ever told him no. Her heart pounded as she kept close to Mr. Lawson's side. She could feel Principal Matthews's stare, boring into her back. But for the first time in hours, she didn't feel completely powerless. As they stepped outside into the cool evening air, Emma inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with something that felt like relief. But she knew this wasn't over, not yet, and neither did Mr. Lawson. He looked down at her, concern etched in the deep lines of his face. "You want to tell me what happened?" Emma hesitated. She wanted to, but saying it out loud made it real. And if it was real, then what happened next? Mr. Lawson gave her time, not rushing her, not pushing. He just waited. Finally she whispered, "I saw something." His eyes narrowed. "Something you weren't supposed to?" She nodded, and suddenly her pulse skyrocketed again as she glanced back at the school doors, half expecting to see Principal Matthews following them. "I think he knows I saw," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "And I think he's trying to make sure I don't tell anyone." Mr. Lawson didn't react right away. He just looked out toward the darkening sky, his jaw tightening slightly, before he finally spoke. "Then we're gonna make sure you do." Emma swallowed hard, because now she wasn't just scared for herself. Emma's breath felt tight in her chest as she stood beside Mr. Lawson, the night air cool against her flushed skin. The weight of what she had just said hung between them, heavy and unspoken. She had seen something she wasn't supposed to, and Principal Matthews knew. Mr. Lawson stayed quiet for a moment, his gaze steady, his mind clearly working through the possibilities. Finally he spoke. "All right," he said, his voice even, calm. "Then we're gonna make sure you're safe, first, and then we're gonna make sure the truth comes out." Emma swallowed, nodding, but doubt still clung to her. "What if no one believes me?" she whispered. His eyes softened. "I believe you." The words settled in her chest, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. They started walking toward the parking lot. The school's security lights cast long shadows across the pavement, and Emma couldn't help but glance back at the building, half expecting to see Principal Matthews standing in the doorway, watching her. But he wasn't there. The hallways were empty now, too quiet. Mr. Lawson led her toward his old truck, unlocking the passenger door. "You got someone at home?" he asked. Emma hesitated. "My mom works late. She won't be home for a while." He nodded, thinking, "All right, then we go somewhere safe first." As they pulled out of the school parking lot, Emma's thoughts raced. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the moment that had changed everything. The moment she had accidentally walked past Principal Matthews's office and seen him in a hushed conversation with a man she didn't recognize. The door had been slightly open, just enough for her to hear words that made her stomach drop. It was about money, a cover-up, something about the school board never finding out. She hadn't understood everything at first, but the way Principal Matthews's voice had lowered, the way he had suddenly gone stiff when he noticed her standing there, it had been enough to set off alarms in her head, and now he was trying to make sure she stayed quiet. Mr. Lawson turned onto a quieter road, the hum of the truck's engine the only sound between them. "We should go to the police," he said finally. Emma's stomach twisted. "But what if—" "Emma." He looked over at her, his voice firm but kind. "If we don't, this doesn't stop. If he's willing to scare a kid into silence, he's done this before, and he'll do it again." She knew he was right. By the time they reached the police station, Emma's hands were ice cold. Her nerves shot, but Mr. Lawson never left her side. The officers listened, they took notes, and when Emma finally finished speaking, there was a long silence before one of them leaned forward and said, "You did the right thing coming here." From there, everything moved fast. The school board was contacted, investigations were opened, and as the days passed, the truth unraveled piece by piece. It turned out Emma wasn't the only one who had noticed strange things happening under Principal Matthews' leadership. Financial records didn't add up, complaints had been dismissed, and soon the evidence became too much to ignore. The last time Emma saw Principal Matthews was on the news. He had been escorted out of the school, his face pale, his polished demeanor finally breaking under the weight of everything he had tried to hide. Mr. Lawson stood beside her as they watched the footage on the tiny TV in his janitor's office. "You okay?" he asked after a moment. Emma exhaled slowly, then nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." She had been scared. She had doubted herself, but in the end, she had done the right thing. And thanks to Mr. Lawson, she hadn't done it alone. As she left the office that day, stepping into the sunlight, Emma felt lighter. The fear was gone, and in its place was something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope.